talking about isms and how these different political ideologies start to change really the fabric of Europe, and how things go from being religious based, and a lot of conflicts are based around religion, to ideological conflict. We talked about nationalism, which will come up again and again, and liberalism will come up again. A lot of these will go into a little bit more depth when they start to become part of the conversation. But for right now, right, the idea of liberalism as a political ideology is not a new idea. It comes from the Enlightenment. It is the belief on of limited government focused around classical ideas such as natural rights and popular sovereignty. Yeah, okay. Doesn't sound right when it's coming out of my mouth. Who were some leaders in liberalism? Jeffrey Bentham. He wrote before the period of liberalism, but his ideas influenced it. He developed the idea of utilitarianism, which argues that the actions should be judged based on whether or not they increase the happiness of those affected around them. John Stuart Mill, who publishes the idea that people should work for the happiness of others. He also created a work called The Subjugation of Women, which begins the concept of women's rights. And so feminism can be traced back to him, which is weird because he's a guy. Some liberals also argue that fundamental rights like the right to vote should be limited to those that own land because they have a stake in society. So if you don't own land, you shouldn't be allowed to vote because you have no, you're not tied to anything. So there's again, with a lot of these movements, there's a split amongst those that believe it. Talked about socialism, right? Which is the ideology that demands a society's means of production should be owned by the country, not private individuals. It introduces the concept of the redistribution of wealth, which means that the state or the government is going to take control of the wealth in a country and distribute it amongst the people to ensure, equity in one sense or another. Again, just like liberalism, all these different flavors of each ism is going to develop as the followers of it start to argue most of the time on how we achieve the goals of the ism. So one of those examples for socialism is utopian socialism, which is a belief that society should be given to the workers and taken from the clergy and those of the state and those of the nobility who have historically profited off of the majority and offer nothing really in return. Am I coming through? Check. I hope it's recording my audio. Is anybody watching this that can hear me? Hold on. I just want to make sure it's still coming through. Nina is. Just getting paranoid because I did have this one. Oh, it's fine. All right, perfect. Thank you, Nina. Shout out to Nina, everybody. Shout out to Nina. Thank you, Nina. You're the best. Where would we be without you? Lost. So, utopian socialism is this idea of basically a utopian society centered around socialism. There are a couple of guys, Charles Fourier and Robert Owen, who actually put it into practice, and they build a community called Intentional Communities in Scotland where they practice utopian socialism, and they have some success, but that really never takes off in Europe. Finally, that leads us to Marxism. Okay, Karl Marx creates the idea of what's called scientific socialism. Okay, he is the person. He is a guy that is big on socialism, but where he differs from a lot of other socialists of his day is he is not a utopian socialist, right? He believes that in order for socialism to really work, you have to have a hard understanding, a deep understanding of capitalism, and that socialism really should be a response, and this is what Marxism becomes, a direct response to capitalism. Marx is writing during the Industrial Revolution, and so he sees the great disparity that grows amongst the wealthy and the majority as a result of the Industrial Revolution. So he believes that revolution is inevitable, that this will never last, that capitalism will never survive because of the inequity that it produces. And he also believes that the revolution that will come to kind of change the world order will inevitably be violent. Okay. He believes that history follows patterns, and they are mostly centered around class structure. And that the industrialization of Europe has exacerbated the division between the two classes, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Okay. And as a result, we need a new system of government. Right? And so Marxism is a slightly different flavor of socialism, right? Where basically it is the achievement of a form of socialism through rebellion and through force. Okay. Another ism we have is anarchism, which is very simply no government, right? So you can see to this point, we have a lot of like, no, this is the right government. No, this is the right government. It should be socialist. It should be capitalist. It should be democratic. It should be liberal. It should be conservative. It should be Marxist. And then finally, we get all the way to the end of the road where some people just go, you know what? None of them are any good. Let's just have no government. And they're anarchists. Okay. Along with this time, at the end of the industrial age, we have a number of different social reforms. Okay. We talked about some of the workplace reforms. Now we're getting into social reforms. All right. In response to the social problems caused by the Industrial Revolution, many Europeans turned toward politics and political parties to give their lives either meaning or to make them bearable. Okay, we get mass-based political parties. This is the beginning of large-scale political parties. Politics, in the terms that we understand it today, with large political parties, this is a relatively new concept, or actually a very new concept in world history, and it comes about here. Political parties existed prior to this period, but this is where, instead of having a number of small parties that are hyper-focused on certain issues, we have large parties that have at their basis differing ideologies, okay? And they're often, well, at this point, they're going to be connected to social classes. The Conservative Party becomes the party of the landed elite, so the wealthy, the landowners, and the Liberal Party will become that of the working class. Now, the fact that there's such a difference at this time in the population between the two entities means that there is a significant imbalance in power, right? If the working class is the Liberal Party is going to have astronomically more influence because it's a vastly larger population in that social class. Many of the working class people in Europe turn to the Liberal Party in their country for reforms in response to social problems they are experiencing because of the Industrial Revolution. This results in things like public education and increases in affordable and available health care. An example of this would be the German Social Democratic Party. This party is built on the principles of Marxism and was focused on improving the quality of life for the German working class people. Some of their members believed in the inevitable violent revolution, while others believed that we could actually achieve Marxism through government reform. So basically, this is this shift amongst Marxists and socialists. It's like either it has to be done from the outside in, or it can be done from the inside out. We also get labor unions at this time. These are movements organized by workers focused on making social and economic reform in favor of the working class. A lot of these early labor unions will actually develop into political parties. After 1870, labor unions earn the right to strike. In 1888, we get the first big European strike, which is the match industry strike. In 1890, we get the London dock workers strike. And prior to World War I, 1 in 4 workers in England is a member of a union. So this is the mass, spread of union in labor. We also get some changes in women's rights during this period. Women become more involved in advocacy for workers' rights. And as they become involved in political issues and political activism, they're going to start to take up their own issue, which is women's rights. A couple influential women in this period in women's rights: Barbara Smith. I can't say her name. Bodichon? I don't know. She's an English woman who works to establish the Ladies of Langdon Place, which work together to extend voting rights and property rights to women. We get Flora Tristan, something like that, a French woman who was a utopian socialist whose work inspired the Women's Social and Political Union, started by the Pankhurst family, who had held rallies in favor of women's rights. And then we have the Sunday school movement, which is massively influential for women's rights. It's a movement designed to provide education for working class children. It was a massive success. And a lot of adults, when they brought their kids to Sunday school, actually went with them, and that enabled them to learn how to read and write, because many of them were not really educated because they had to go to work at a young age. What are some other reforms? We get a change of government from what's called laissez-faire to interventionist, right? Remember, when we got into industrialization, there is this belief pushed by guys like Adam Smith that governments should not be involved in the economies of their country, right? That we should leave the economics to do its thing, leave it to the market, right? Don't be involved. And that works really well in the beginning. That's where we see the boom of this industrialization. But as time goes on, what we realize is unrestricted economies, especially capitalist, will begin to cause problems, right? And it's not necessarily in the best interest of everyone. And so governments start to shift into a place of being interventionists, like, hey, we have to reel things in, right? In the middle of the 19th century, with the significant problems of overcrowding and crime created by mass urbanization, people began to demand liberal reforms of their government. Okay, what are some of the reforms? We get public health reforms. Edwin Chadwick of Great Britain sought to reform with the poor. He found that diseases spread faster among the poor due to unsanitary and filthy conditions they live in. This led to the first government policies mandating sanitation, such as the building of a sanitation and clean water systems for the public. They were so popular, these efforts to kind of reform and clean up these cities, they made the politicians so popular with the people that politicians quickly realized, hey, if we do this, we get a lot of votes. So let's keep doing it so we can stay in office. And so that means there's only going to be more reforms. This will lead to, in Great Britain, for example, the Liberal Party becoming the majority of the government in 1906. We also get something called urban planning, which develops. This is something that starts in France under Napoleon III. He's going to pick a guy by the name of George Haussmann. And what he's going to say is like, hey, listen, our cities are overcrowded because they're industrialized. They're disgusting. They suck. Instead of trying to like reform them through legislation or whatever, just tear them down. Just tear them down and rebuild them for the issues of the day. And so that's what George Haussmann's going to be tasked to do. He's going to actually rebuild Paris. And in doing so, it's going to be the new Paris is going to be focused around infrastructure that allows for sanitation, that allows for cleanliness. And then, bonus win, we're going to set it up so that the streets aren't that easy for the people of France to blockade should there be another revolution. Maybe. So that's like a secondary win. We also get the invention at this time of professional law enforcement, which is something that people might not realize, like doesn't really exist throughout most of human history up to this point in Europe in particular. So there were law enforcement before this. Sometimes private companies might hire somebody to protect their goods. We obviously had the military, which at times would be used internally as a police force in certain situations, usually a revolt, rebellion, something like that. And then there was just kind of like individualistic, not official, not professional organizations, units, or individuals that would carry out justice. This is the beginning of professional law enforcement, meaning even in some of the industrial cities where we had like police officers before, they weren't professional in the sense that they weren't like trained. Like we just decided, hey, do you want to be a cop? And you got like a nightstick or something. Now you're going to go to a police academy. You're going to be trained in law enforcement practices. There's going to be just formal law enforcement structures. And again, this comes about in direct correlation to the birth of organized crime, which starts towards the end of the age of industrialization in a lot of these places. So at the same time that criminals are really starting to work together and be organized, we're going to have to organize and professionalize law enforcement. We also get compulsory education laws. We're going to require young people to go to school for 3 reasons, right? It sounds like a great thing that the government would do that's like really selfless, but it is a fulfilling thing to push for the state for 3 reasons. 1, public order. If we don't have kids running around the streets all day, that's just generally good for everybody. 2, it allows you to spread nationalism. So we're going to put everyone in school and we're going to put them in our schools that we control. And then we're going to mandate that they learn our history and that they, do different things that spread nationalism. And then 3, economic growth. The more educated people are, the better jobs they get. The better jobs they get, the more money they have. The more money they have, the more money they spend, and so on and so forth. So that's industrialization. And that brings us to, oh no, our next topic. So I take a drink. One of the things that's confusing a little bit, and we've talked about this, about European history, is we separate topics and periods, and sometimes when we talk about different topics or periods, they're happening kind of at the same time, which is a little confusing. So when we talk about the Industrial Revolution, it's part of this period between, I would say, Napoleon, the Napoleonic era, and the start of World War I. There's this vast, sweeping period of European history where there's both industrialization, there's isms and political ideologies developing, and now we're going to talk about some of the other things that are happening that really lead up to the start of World War I. Things like nationalism, different revolutions, things like this. We talked about nationalism before as an ism. Just some specifics. It goes from 1815 to 1914. Okay. Nationalism is both a good and a bad thing. Really depends on how it's practiced, right? We talked about nationalism as an ideology previously. What is it? It's the feeling of strong identification with one's own people and one's own cultural heritage, and those bonds that are strengthened by a shared history and common language. It breaks down into the nation and the state, right? And those things can be different and or the same. The nation is the people who share the language, the culture, and the history, and the state is the land in which or on which the people live and the government controls. And so nationalism starts out not necessarily as a bad thing, because what you'll see is it starts people realizing that they have national connections leads to the unification of different countries. So like Italy becoming Italy, Germany becoming Germany. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but just like everything else in human history and European history, right? It's a line and we always take it too far. So where it starts out pretty good, where it's like, hey, we're all German and that's pretty cool. And maybe we should be German and not like 15 different things. Where it's going to go is, hey, we're German or we're French, and German people and French people are better than everyone else. So that superiority part is what begins to develop in nationalism, and that's going to lead to conflict down the road. What are the causes of the growing nationalism throughout Europe at this time? We have romantic idealism. So there's these different writers and kind of thought leaders that are pushing this very rose-colored view of the history of basically whatever country you're talking about. So it's like, you know, this idea that France, hey, remember when France was great? And shouldn't we be great again? Remember when Germany or the German people were great? We should be great again. This type of thing. Examples of this would be the Brothers Grimm, who wrote a collection of published German fairy tales and folk tales. These were German stories for the German people. And that gave people pride in being German. So like everybody's reading the Brothers Grimm and everyone's like, yeah, that's German, man. Yeah, bruh. Another example of this is Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Miserables. Les Mis. Okay. Which is a story about the French Revolution. So everyone's like, oh, and it's super popular. So everyone's like, hey, remember when France was awesome? During this time, there's also some liberal reforms, right? In France, we get Napoleon III. So we're on our third Napoleon now in France. He rebuilt Paris, like we talked about, arranged for new trade with other nations, pushed for universal male suffrage, and became very popular and spread French nationalism. We also get the unification of Italy, which we'll talk about. And we also get, as a result of nationalism, racialism, which is which has positive and negative effects. So this is the kind of hyper focus on racial identity and racial differences. A positive example could be the Pan-Slavic movement, where the Slavic people begin to seek separation from the Ottoman Empire, resulting in the establishment of new independent countries. The negative is obviously the rise of anti-Semitism. So one thing that we see is as nationalism rises in Europe, so does anti-Semitism. And again, this is yet another example throughout European history of Jews being persecuted because they are the other, a lot of times in the room of Europe, so to speak. So it's not a good, yet another time in Europe not good to be of the Jewish faith. But as a result of that growing anti-Semitism, we get a newism, which is Zionism. And this is created by a guy by the name of Dreyfus Affair, if I'm pronouncing that correct. I'm sorry, no, Dreyfus Affair. I'm an idiot. Thank you. The Dreyfus Affair is a big part of what spreads nationalism. Okay, Alfred Dreyfus is a captain in the French army. He's accused of sharing French secrets with the German people. He's tried, he's found guilty, and that spreads the idea that Jews are not, at this time, that they're not nationalistic. So they don't, though that you might have Jewish people in your country, they have no allegiance to the state, and so they could be traitors. You know, they're going to work for their own benefit, this types of things. So it increases anti-Semitism. Zionism is the ism that develops in response to anti-Semitism. Theodor Herzl is ironically a German Jew who believes that the Jewish people in Europe should have their own, well, Jewish people in the world should have their own state. It should be in Palestine, which is their ancestral home. Now, this is important. Zionism develops, and this idea of what will become Israel develops way before Israel becomes a state. This idea predates World War I even. It won't be until after World War II and the Holocaust that it's actually put into practice. But Theodor Herzl, Zionism, Israel, that concept of Israel, way earlier.
Part of the interruption. At this time, anyone who has borrowed a laptop, please return it to the region. Again, if you've borrowed a laptop, please return it to the park.
All right. So we're also going to get some nationalistic leaders during this time. Bismarck is the big one. We'll talk about him in a second. And so nationalism, the spread of nationalism, is going to lead to what's called national unifications, which also leads to diplomatic tension. The first one example of this is the Crimean War, which takes place from 1853 to 1856. This is the Crimean War marks this end of 50 years of peace in Europe. Remember, we talked about the balance of power and kind of all of the focus of that age of conservatism, which is based around maintaining peace in Europe and no more European conflicts. This is where it ends with the Crimean War. The Crimean War is based around religious tension and political motives. Again, what you'll notice here is the Ottoman Empire, which becomes extremely big and extremely powerful and extremely influential in Europe. During this period, kind of late 1800s, they're going to progressively get chipped away at, where a bunch of their territories are going to seek independence, and they're going to start to fall, which will culminate in World War I. But a lot of these kind of revolutions and these movements are different pieces of the Ottoman Empire seeking to kind of separate and go out on their own. So the Ottoman Empire controlled a significant part of this region of the world, and Russia and France both start pressuring the Ottoman Empire to basically let them go. It's also a dispute over privileges that are afforded in the Ottoman Empire to Catholics and Orthodox Christians. France pressures the Ottoman Empire to give Roman Catholics special treatment, special concessions. They agree, but they do not agree with Russia to give those same special considerations to Christian Orthodox Christians, and that creates kind of hurt feelings. Generally, France and Russia aim to weaken the Ottoman Empire and gain control of the Crimean Peninsula. Again, everybody in Europe besides the Ottomans want the Ottoman Empire to fall apart at this time. And so this is a situation where France and Russia are going to manipulate the situation and pressure the Ottoman Empire in an effort, not really because they care about the people in that part of the world or that part of Europe, but mainly they just wanted to destabilize the Ottoman Empire. And they're successful in destabilizing that part of the world. And again, that's the first kind of negative chip away thing for the Ottoman Empire. All right, I'm gonna stop there for today. We'll pick it up tomorrow with our next review, which will take us from this point, and then we'll do World War I.